Welcome, everyone. You are listening to A Word Fitly Spoken. I'm Willie Grills here with Zelwyn, Heidi, Adam Koontz, Aaron Uphoff, and David Appold here for Word Fitly 150. It is a conclave of sorts, so I'll take it all in turn and ask everyone how they're doing. Zelwyn, how are you? How is the weather?
Doing great, Willie. Things are going very well, and the weather is actually kind of cold and rainy today. So winter.
So you're happy. You're in your happy place.
It's true. It is true.
Adam, the Indiana prairie. Just go ahead and give my weather update too while you're at it.
Yeah, well, it's cold and clear, sunny. Not my fave, but better than rain.
There we go. Hey, Aaron.
It is cool and gray here. We had a big rain the other day, and one of the local towns is flooded out.
Okay. And your prayers for seasonable weather were not heard. Duly noted. And David.
Things are good in Paducah. Fall is sort of here. I think we're supposed to get into the 80s again this week, but we had to switch over the church system from cooling to heating. So that is the real sign that fall is here. Sunny and 60 today. Gotcha.
Well, the weather is pretty much Adam and Aaron's here in my part of Illinois. Although I won't give a full update, but my weather announcements could change soon in the near future. So stay tuned for that one. All right, guys. Well, great to have you all on here. It is our 150th episode, the big Word Fitly 150 celebration. So we are going to take some of your questions here, but we also want to talk about Word Fitly, what we are and how we got here. So Zelwyn, why don't you tell the folks at home a little bit about the genesis of Word Fitly?
Well, if I remember correctly, it started in a restaurant, didn't it? Guys, you need to remind me if my memory is blank here, but we came up with the idea to have this podcast and to talk about some various things. Oh, what would that be? 5 years ago, I want to say. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's been going this long, but it just kind of evolved into what it is today. I mean, we've been going solid for 150 episodes, and we'll see how many more we end up doing.
I don't even remember half of what we've talked about. So that's fun.
I barely remember the first episode. I mean, and that was the one that I think we had the most difficulty with. But it was
right, we didn't know what we were doing. I was recording into a potato. Still good content, though. And the five guys here, I mean, this is the original, unless I'm mistaken, this is the original Word Fitly ensemble. This is the original crew, the OG.
Including Aaron, so...
Yes, hello.
Yeah, believe it or not, Aaron is a founding member. A lot of people don't know that, but he didn't get internet till 2020. So we got him on there.
Still doesn't have it, actually. So.
We're not really sure how he's chiming in here, but
putting the silent in silent partner. Yeah.
Right.
When did we become self-aware? I think it was probably around episode 30 or so. I mean, Aaron programmed the thing. And then it just kind of took off, and now we are fully to be doing this episode. We're engaged in some serious kind of self-reflection here.
Right. Well, the world's changed, and whatever. It's going to keep changing. And Word Fitly's just going to keep getting spicier. It'll be fine. We're towing the line here. No, we're towing the line. We holding the line. What's the right idiom? I don't know, but we're doing something here at Word Fitly.
Do you guys want to chime in with some of the history here, or what do you want to do, or talk about your reflections?
I think we thought we were going to write more, but then it turned out to be more fun.
Yeah,
to talk to each other.
The great shame, the dark secret of Word Fitly is that it started as a blog, whatever that is.
Disgusting 2009 facts.
Yeah, like it was a Zanga, and. So
we actually started out on LiveJournal because that's how old we are, and then
right?
Kind of went off from there,
right? And then now we just get all of our takes from 8chan. So we evolve. It is So we went with a podcast, as everyone else does, because it's not every good church has a mortgage. Every minister has to have a podcast now, I think, and so. Certain kind of tricks at play, I suppose. So it ended up being a podcast, and now here we are. And we're going to keep going, Lord willing, and we'll see where we go from here. A lot of good episodes coming up. It's been great getting to hear from the audience what they like to hear. Great to see the kind of people that are listening to our podcast. We love Word Fitly Nation, so keep on keeping on. And we also love when people don't like the podcast too, because it's pretty funny. When we get our detractors as well.
There's too much giggling.
You can't be laughing on a podcast. Serbs, what are you going to do? Yeah, so we love our detractors and we love our fans. So keep it up. And we of course want to remind you that this podcast is but mostly made for Anons. Anons, keep up the good work out there. We appreciate all that you're doing. Word Fitly does not officially sponsor troll farms, though, just for the record. So anyway, so here we are. Word Fitly has a reputation for focusing on obscure Lutheran history. Believe it or not, that's and we've got more of that coming, I believe, right, Adam? We've got some stuff to pull out.
Yeah, we have some odd theories about things, and we have some more figures that deserve to be better known and events that deserve to be better understood. So we'll be coming back to that in addition to some American Christianity stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Word Fitly is kind of a high strangeness podcast, and we want to keep it that way. Eventually, we're going to get Aaron back on. I don't know what he's going to talk about, but we're going to get him back, right?
Sure.
David is continuing to spearhead Revelation. We'll probably finish Revelation sometime within the year, so that will be fun. Or the events of Revelation will unfold, and we won't get to finish it. Either way.
Now, be honest, though. We're going to be at Revelation for probably, the next 5 years or so?
Well, we'll see. It's not Jude or anything here.
I think we'll finish it. We'll finish it this year.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really just, I don't know if the listeners have picked up on this, but the Revelation series is really just an enactment of what it's like to be in an average midweek Bible class at a church where it just goes on for 3 years for no particular
right.
So
I feel seen.
Well,
and it's about the end times, so that's what people like.
With very few questions,
Right.
And, everybody just staring at you like hoot owls.
But we started, and so it must be finished.
It must be finished. We can never put it down.
That's right.
You might take a break for Advent to do your canned CPH study.
I think they're looking at a Donna Pyle Bible study after Revelation.
Oh, man. It's getting too real in here.
It's getting too real. This is. See, when we free bant, that's when we get in trouble. Whatever would I do without exorbitant shipping and chocolate life things? I don't know.
This is also incidentally why we can never go have Word Fitly live, because it would just end in disaster.
You guys have no idea what we cut. You have no idea how much Zelwyn censors me, is what I'm trying to say.
And also the true origin of Word Fitly spoken.
Right. The truth is, I'm just a carefully crafted product of Zelwyn. He has trimmed me content-wise, so...
And Willie is also actually just carefully crafted AI.
That's right.
Indistinguishable from anything else on the internet. So
right. Remember, folks, everybody you talk to on the internet is a bot. The internet isn't real.
I always thought Word Fitly spoken was a Jesus first fever dream come to life.
Well, they don't know what to do with it. We're a pro-evangelism podcast, so what can you do? Our Zoomer listeners will not get that reference. And our
I barely got that reference.
And our boomer listeners will be simultaneously offended and heartened.
It's like, what is this, 2010?
Yeah, and our Gen X listeners will continue to share horrible memes.
I do want to say one more thing. I've often mentioned that I'm the only real Missouri Synod Lutheran clergyman on the Word Fitly podcast, and I think that contributes to the esoterica and the interest in how did you say it, Willie? Sort of strange gems from the past.
High strangeness.
Yeah, high strangeness. It is because y'all are interlopers, and and I guess I'm just here to provide some semblance of Missouri Synod credibility, which I'm happy to do. But we must.
Well, it's true. It's like the Masons. We must be sponsored by a legacy. Yeah. So if we're going to get in, and you are our legacy, you have taught us the handshake, and you have brought us in.
I'm happy to do my part, and I'm happy to take off the blinders and see things from the vantage point of the outsiders.
Well, Zelwyn was actually in this dimension and others before the Missouri Synod existed. So, just to be completely accurate.
Right. Yeah, Zelwyn is noted as a mysterious figure throughout Lutheran history and throughout the history of taxonomy. We don't really know where to put him.
I've gone by many names. This is just the current one. So
I think the question has always been, is Zelwyn descended from Noah's family or the other passengers on the ark?
He was hanging on to the ark. He was hanging on to the outside.
That Ray Winkle has a whole chapter on Zelwyn in the flood. So pick it up.
Does.
Make sure you pick it up.
And if you can accept it, Willie is Melchizedek.
He's just saying that because of the beard and the fact that I just assume multiple identities. But that's more for credit.
We should probably get to the questions eventually.
We should probably, but who wants to do that? All right. Well, let's go ahead and tackle that. So for 150, what we wanted to focus on, especially since we've been doing a lot of talk lately, and remember, you've got to listen to the full episode because sometimes the titles we don't do a lot of clickbait, so you'll get actually a lot of cultural commentary within an episode that seems pretty blasé. So just for the record, so we want to talk about the current state of the church today, kind of what we think could unfold in the future, what things that the people need to hear, and again, what things people should expect. So the questions are sort of along these lines. So we're going to take them mostly in the order they received them. Some we might save for a future conclave, so we'll see here. So the first one, somebody wants to know about the prevalence of Gnostic beliefs among proclaimed Christians. We're not going to go into this in detail, but we do, as a group, want to caution. Gnosticism, as a historic term, has a specific definition and specific beliefs. And I don't think too many evangelical Christians are out there affirming like the demiurge and things like that. We want to be careful that we aren't using Gnostic as a catch-all for aberrant spiritual practices or attitudes. So, and that's kind of what Gnostic has come to believe. It's kind of the new version of Reformed. So sometimes Lutherans will say Reformed, and they're not coming after the Westminster Confession or the three forms of unity, something like that. They just mean non-Lutheran Protestants. And that's not a very helpful historical definition either. So to answer the question about, Gnostic beliefs, that's really its own episode. And it probably is true that there are some truly Gnostic attitudes out there, but we just want to be careful with the definition. We would operate with a bit of a more narrow definition on that. And I think that's something we could probably tackle a little bit later. But just be careful not to confuse true Gnosticism with kind of a vague mysticism or or merely a denial of the physical or a de-emphasis of the physical. We would want to be careful kind of along those lines. Anything to add to that, guys?
I think one thing that should be added to that as well is that whenever we use a word like Gnostic or Reformed or Pietist, because that's my shtick, in that kind of generic kind of way to mean whatever I want it to mean, you end up actually kind of hurting yourself in the process, because then you can't really pin it down very effectively, and you can't really speak against it very effectively either. Because if you're not being precise in your language, precise about what it is that they exactly believe, rather than just this fuzzy generality, you're never really going to be able to speak to the issue. So we need to be precise in our language and not just label everything whatever we want it to be, so that we can speak to these problems.
All right, very good. Okay, the next question, a good one. What are good ways to conduct conversations with children concerning biblical sexual ethics? And then a related question in regard to gender differences and the roles of men and women, things like that.
Well, I think it starts with using a chaste and decent life in all we say and do. As opposed to...
That will solve all our problems. I agree.
Right catechism, yes.
I mean,
So get the right translation,
well,
folks.
Kidding, not kidding. I mean, I think that obviously you have to talk about things, but it helps if you're not forcing the issue into a certain extreme with the language that you're using to frame it, namely the catechism translation. But yeah, I mean, David is right. That's not going to solve all of our problems.
But it is helpful. I mean, unpack that a little bit.
Well, I mean, I think about it with teaching kids. If you're going to, especially pastors are pretty good at catechizing their kids at home. And if you're teaching them the catechism from an early age, even as soon as they're able to speak, they're going to learn the words, but they're going to have questions about what something means, especially if it's a word they don't hear mom and dad use. So if you're teaching them the commandments and then the explanation to the commandments, eventually, your 4-year-old is going to say, was it sexually pure? Is that the word that the 86 translation?
One, yeah.
What does that mean, Dad? And where you say chaste and decent, then you can kind of fill that in as they get older. I don't know. It seems more prudent to go with the old one there, but it's easy just to get caught up in those little details and then use that as an excuse not to deal with bigger, more important, pressing things. I don't know.
I like how you're trying to pass yourself off as like, I don't even look at the new catechism. Like, what does it say? I don't even know.
Well, ironically, that is the one I have memorized. So as an adult convert. But.
All right. Any other bits of advice on that one?
I think a lot of discussions of, quote, sexual education are completely unnecessary. People intuit many things about life. You don't need to be desperately explicit or clear or intentional about talking about these things incessantly. I think probably it's a lot more important to keep your kids generally just off the internet more than anything else. And somehow the human race propagated itself without sex education, in Lutheran schools or any other kind prior to a certain time period. So they'll figure it out.
I think that's well said. One of the things I remember being in an evangelical college where, especially before they got the football team, rules were very strict, but they always were like, "Yeah, we need to talk about sex all the time because sex has been a big taboo." But the reality was that's all they talked about. It became
right, yeah.
All the professors talked about it because they thought it was edgy. And so we've got that problem too, where we're borderline crude sometimes in the way that we approach these things.
Well, it's like the problem that so many kids didn't know what drugs were except for the DARE program.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Although, Scruff McGruff probably kept us out of some trouble.
Take a bite out of crap.
Love that big fella.
Yeah. This is a Scruff McGruff respecting podcast.
Always.
But I mean, there is something to be said about, I mean, they just, they turn even the Song of Solomon into something more lewd than it needs to be because everything is so hyper sexualized even within the church. And this is not even talking about, the mega churches that do these seminars on sex and things like that. This is just run of the mill Christians just wanting to talk about it all the time. That's obsessive behavior, really. And you need to quit it, just move on to a different subject. Let kids be kids. Let your daughters wear prairie dresses and your boys go out and dig in the dirt and let them be kids for a little bit. And I think Adam, you said it well. I mean, not advocating completely. You're not completely like keeping them in the dark, and yet you're not unnecessarily and graphically exposing them to things unintentionally. So yeah, well said, guys. And I will take this last one very quickly before we go to break. Teaching children about the doctrine of the Trinity. I'm going to take this one just to answer it really quick. Teaching kids the Trinity, here's what you do. You teach them the words that we confess. One God, 3 persons. One God, 3 persons, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and let them get that into their head. And then read the Bible to them. You don't need to get an apple or an egg or water. Just give them the words that we use to describe this doctrine, and they'll get it. Any more words before we head to break, guys? We got some spicy ones coming up right after the break here on Word Fitly Spoken. Welcome back, everyone. This is Word Fitly 150. Got the whole OG crew here to talk about your questions here on the conclave. So the conclave has convened. Wow, I could have dismounted on that one a little bit more smoothly, but here we are to answer your questions here at Word Fitly. The next one is really rather interesting. A listener wants to know, do you think a re-examination of church polity and ministerial roles would be worthwhile for American confessional Lutheranism in the future?
Yeah, I definitely think it would be worthwhile. I don't know if it generally these things don't happen except under some kind of duress, right? So the Tennessee Synod, with which the listeners, if they are loyal Christians, should be familiar, comes out of stress over abuse of authority in the North Carolina Synod. So apart from those circumstances, re-examination probably isn't going to happen. So a lot of it has happened. Honestly, I think if you search enough, micro synods, you are going to come up with almost every variant of Christian polity inside something called a Lutheran Church in the United States of America.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember, and I think most people know this, that a certain polity is not going to free you completely from issues and even error. There are going to be abuses of power. And the Tennessee Synod rightly understood that anywhere you have institutions, especially once they become a certain size, no matter how they're organized, you will have abuses of power. They will become merely self-perpetuating. And that was the great concern that the Tennessee Synod prophets had. And there is a great danger there. So that we don't want to put all of our trust just in polity, right? Although there is a very good discussion to be had over what makes a better polity. And without talking about biblical prescription, I do think it's an interesting discussion. Do certain polities work in other cultures better than in others? Can a congregational polity work better in a 19th century Lutheran context than in a 21st century? Again, that's a separate question from what's biblically right or whatever. But what works better in certain contexts. It's just like forms of government. Certain forms of government cannot work in certain parts of the world.
Well, can you read me the original question again, just to be sure here? Because, are we talking about polity specifically, or are we talking about understanding of the ministry? Because that might be a different question.
It's both. Do you think a re-examination of church polity and ministerial roles would be worthwhile for American confessional Lutheranism?
So polity was part of the original question, but I think the ministerial role question is that a question of understanding of the ministry, especially as it's expressed within
polity and understanding of the ministry will go hand in hand necessarily. If you have like a Campbellite view where you don't believe in, say, pastors, but only some lay elder board, boom, that informs your understanding of the ministry. If you believe in a tiered form of the ministry where you have bishop, priest, and deacon, okay, there's polity and ministry or ministerial roles hand in hand. Keep in mind in the Missouri Synod, bishop is synonymous with pastor, and that informs our organization. And then it's a little bit complicated by then what is the role of the voters' assembly, which has unquestionably changed since the founding of the Synod. Broadly, it just is the way it is. And even if you just go look at the major change, which was women voters, it has changed. And by necessity, our expression of what a voters' assembly constitutes and decides has changed just based upon that one thing, frankly. And if you look at even somebody like Gerberding's polity, which is contemporaneous, with a certain air of the Missouri Synod, it's rather different from ours. But it's not European, would you say?
You make a good point with the connection between like beliefs and our understanding and our polity. Because you think of, like, for example, around here we have the old apostolic Lutherans, which would be the Finns, those full blown Laestadians, and since they believe that the absolution is something which is done by any Christian and not by the minister in particular, therefore they have a correspondingly low view of the ministry itself. That the ministry becomes something which can just be raised up as needed, from a man within the congregation. So yeah, how we understand these things is going to influence how we view.
But to be fair, what you described there is a view that would be common in many of our congregations.
Fair.
Especially a view, because if we believe that the pastors are given the authority and the call to bind and loose, and now somebody's going to chime in and go, well, the congregation hands them the keys. I don't want to get into that. But what happens is they'll quickly pivot to, yes, but everybody can forgive sins. And then, so we've actually been absorbed by a kind of egalitarian view. Now, not explicitly, not on paper. And this is the big struggle for us is Missouri Synod on paper versus Missouri Synod in action. And that's why you have such a broad spectrum across the Synod. You have a very low view of the ministry in certain circles. And I don't know how broad that is. And you have a very high and respectful, and I would say right view in many of our congregations too. But you do have a view in some circles that approaches kind of what you described there. And I don't think the problem is because you raise somebody up out of from among you. That's biblical. But the problem is, of course, what they mean by that.
Right.
Yeah. Frank, you're on absolution duty now. Here, hold this and do that. And that's a bit of a straw man. I don't know that that's exactly how they would do that, but you know what I mean. So really what we have is a confusion in the Missouri Synod today. And we have a confusion in broader confessional Lutheranism because there's great division among broader confessional Lutheranism. Confessionalism should unite us, and oftentimes it divides us because of differing interpretations. I think, and we can all broadly agree on certain things, but if we were all in perfect unity, we wouldn't have so many micro-synods, or so many synods, period.
I think there's also something going on here where you're right, Willie, that understandings of who a minister is and what he's there to do vary widely. And that leads to differences in polity, even within the Missouri Synod, where theoretically the constitutions are all effectively the same or have much of the same, let's say, structure. So it's sort of like how, every state is supposed to have a Republican form of government, but, a single party state, even though that's not in a state constitution, California is going to operate vastly differently than, North Carolina, where things are more divided. So, for instance, the Voters' Assembly is going to exist in the vast majority of Missouri Synod churches, but its functioning is going to vary widely if they remember having Tuesday evening voters meetings and it was like a really serious thing versus it's like a commuter church in some kind of non-Lutheran area. Nobody really cares about this. It's just kind of the machinery, and effectively the pastor and the church council run the church. That's not really functionally at all in line with what Trinity Soulard, which is the model constitution for Missouri Synod congregations, envisioned. And it's very different from the degree to which really Walther and many of his generation were, I think, controlled by their churches in a way that we would generally find very strange, not even thinkable. So you cannot take a call until your church peacefully releases you.
Peacefully releases you. Yeah, it was exactly what I thought when you said that. And now it's technically you're supposed to sort of get one as a nice custom. It's a fare thee well sort of thing. Yeah. In those days you could get caught in limbo. Well, I've accepted this call. Yeah, we've not.
Right. Yeah. Right. So I think that those functional differences, and then there are some churches, usually very large churches, that are run on policy-based governance, which is not at all a traditional church structure. It's a corporate, it's a Fortune 500 structure. So those variations do affect who the minister is. That is, even if the theology of the ministry is relatively, let's say, low in a given place, the minister might functionally be running running a show which is enormous, and he's functioning kind of like he needs an MBA to do it.
Well, I mean, that was, the big program from a few years back, right? Wanted to turn everybody into an entrepreneur. We've adopted we adopted corporate language. And there, that's where the discussion of polity is actually very important because, I do think that sort of thing is beyond the pale. I mean, I don't think you can find anything like that in the scripture. And it's too corporate. It's too worldly. As much as people like to crow about the democratic spirit in the church, and there are certainly dangers there. You could at least see some form of voting, or at least casting lots in the book of Acts, for example, or calling people out from among them, that sort of thing. There's some sort of group consensus, but there's nothing really. There's certainly a top-down approach, but not a business model approach. Yeah. It's far too worldly.
No.
So there certainly is a place to discuss polity in the future, and as Adam said, it usually comes as a result of great strife within a certain group. Yeah. So, any more on that, guys?
Well, I would just maybe point out, like, I think all of us sort of instinctually hear that question as being like, should we have bishops or not? Like, that's often where the discussion goes on this. But as I'm listening to you guys talk, it would be interesting to know, like, what, and maybe we could do a whole episode on this. What would yes, those forms and having a tiered clergy is part of the discussion, but there's a lot more substantial things that need to be discussed here that are related to this polity and the function of the minister. I don't know if we could list them out off the top of our heads here, but I'd be curious to hear what you guys would say to that. What are the key components that would be part of that discussion about polity? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that, two things about bishops. One is just the question you just asked, David. I think that is, for me, one of the major failings of Episcopal small e systems is that it's not actually biblically connected to those who must give account concerning your souls. Right. So you have obvious functions of the office of the ministry in the New Testament, and those are not actually remedied by the relatively uncomplicated and clear corporate structure, because that's what it is, that a church with Episcopal polity follows. The other thing practically is that many, many, many very good Lutheran churches would have been closed for a very long time if we had an Episcopal polity. So the other issue is you're creating a class of people who have simultaneously no day-to-day acquaintance with the needs of the church on the ground, and then two, an interest in pleasing authorities higher than themselves, governmental authorities, ecclesiastical, whatever. You don't want that situation where there is conflict between what the needs of the church are, like staying open, and then on the other hand, what the government wants or something.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Well, and part of the issue is too, everybody wants bishops until he's not on your side.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then it becomes, and it's very easy for a church body to slip into apostasy. And so before you know it, you're TEC, you're the Episcopal Church, and you're the PCUSA, or you're seizing land or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think the only sane thing is the tier goes this way from top to bottom: General Assembly, Presbytery, and Session, guys. And we're all ran by Robert's Rules of Order. It's very great, very clean, very cut and dry.
Just looking at like Roman Catholicism around here, I know that the local Roman Catholic Church was closed for a very long time, even though other churches in town had opened. And I think, like you say, it's because the bishop had said, no, we're not going to let you do this. But I think maybe what I would like to add to this is that if we are looking to like an Episcopal structure as a way of solving issues, I think that kind of misses the current crisis that we're in, because the crisis we're in is not a matter of who's in charge. The crisis that we're in is a matter of holding firm. We are being called in a way that generations have not before us to stand firm against, worldly incursions that, just practically are unprecedented within our recent history. And so we don't need to worry about who's calling the shots. We need to worry about, are you going to stand hard when you need to stand hard?
Yeah, that's well said. I think the psychological trials of believers in the last days will be something akin to the physical trials of believers in times past. And we need to be ready for that. And, frankly, as you say, it's going to be done at the local level. It's going to be done at the parish level and at the household level. And, it may be that you've got to go back to meeting in homes again because they want to shutter your doors. And, frankly, even in the Lutheran Church, some people went right along with shutting their doors and things like that. We've got a question that deals a little bit about that coming up later, so I don't want to get entirely into it just now. But yeah, I mean, what you guys say is absolutely great. And what Adam said, if we'd had an Episcopal system, our churches would have been closed due to numbers and finances long ago. But a lot more of our churches would have been closed in the recent COVID stuff, and really rather arbitrarily closed. It's because of the way the territories work, and so wouldn't have been good for our churches. And that's something that we forget to think about, that the reason why so many pastors and congregations are free to be confessional and faithful. I almost said free to be faithful. Forgive me. Is because I got to pay a nickel every time I say it. Is because of their local power. They can stand firm in their confession and in their beliefs, and they can stay open. And nobody can tell them nobody in the ecclesial hierarchy can tell them they have to shut down.
Right.
And that really is a blessing that we forget about. So well said, guys.
Well, I mean, even a congregational system in general was kind of born out of that same situation, right? This idea that the Episcopal structure is trying to shut you down, and so we're going to go to, more independent kind of a thing.
Ultimately, the revelation or the Reformation is a little bit that.
I mean, Zelwyn, also anything that actually has an Episcopal form of government in the United States is always less hierarchically operative than the exact same church in a different place. So vestries in Episcopalian churches, parish councils in Orthodox and Catholic churches all have a bigger role and have historically their entire existence in the United States than the exact same thing in Greece or England or France. So I think that this is also part of the alienation, especially of men our age and younger, from the United States of America, because they were never taught anything positive about their own nation's history. And so they long for things that really are simply untenable and totally untraditional in the US, including kissing the rings of prelates,
Right.
That is his ecclesiastical supervisor now, paging.
On the phone, polishing his signet ring and waiting.
We heard you, sir.
Well, all right, guys. Well, we've got a couple minutes left here. We're not going to go on into one of the bigger questions until the next segment. I think just kind of continuing on this church polity question just for a couple minutes. Just a reminder that no polity, of course, is going to free. Man, the higher ups do not like what we are talking about here. No polity is going to completely save you. It takes faithful pastors and faithful members believing that word first and foremost. Because even churches where, like the Orthodox or even in Catholicism, where the office of bishop is seen as divinely instituted and it's very powerful, they even recognize the tendency for bishops to become corrupt. And so that at least they understand that. They're not living under any kind of illusion that there won't be trials for the faithful and even for the church because of that.
I think the temptation, to piggyback off of what you're saying, is just for how things are messed up in various ways now, to just have this abstract idea, well, if only we could do X, Y, or Z, then these problems would straighten themselves out. And it's very easy to daydream about that for a lot of things. I mean, I think we're all Divine Service 3 enjoyers here, but it's a fool's errand to think, well, if we just get only that service, then, people will start to have everything right in their mind and their worship and life, which isn't to run it down. It's just to kind of take this abstract thing in your mind and think if we could apply it perfectly, then all our problems will sort out.
If we just use the old catechism, there would be no problems.
Okay.
Put on the poncho, use the old catechism. See, we don't believe in ex opere operato at all, guys. All right, we're up at our next break. We'll be right back with more Word Fitly 150 after this. Welcome back, everyone. This is A Word Fitly Spoken. The Conclave is here for our 150th episode to answer your questions. All right, very good discussion about polity. That was actually the entirety of the last segment, so that was fun. So we'll see how far we can get into the listener questions here. Very good question here. Can a Christian in good conscience practice mild forms of civil disobedience if a government begins to overstep its authority? And of course, we're all thinking of the immediate context here and the shutdowns and various mandates in certain states. And maybe there are other examples we can talk about here of the church disobeying, or perhaps where a church may have to disobey in the future. Guys, who wants to chime in? Oh, we do want to mention before we begin, you will not be hearing from David in this segment. He ran out of AOL discs. He will not be here for the remainder of that. So David is fine. His internet has just ran out. So
I thought he was sucked into the internet like Tron or something like that.
That's right. But he is safe. He has called us collect to let us know that he is safe. So no need to send out a golden alert for David. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about Christian civil disobedience.
Oh, I think of, I'm for one very glad that Moses' mother put him in a basket. I'm sure the Israelites were, and Moses and the Egyptian midwives that did their best not to follow the edicts of Pharaoh in helping the Israelite boys to be born. And I'm sure there's better examples even than that, but the answer is quite obviously yes. We don't owe absolute fealty to the authorities.
Right. The general line is probably going to be that, well, only when it compromises the faith can we disobey, or when we're compelled to, how do we usually put it? Violate the moral law, violate God's law, or something like that. And everybody every Christian would agree, you would hope, unless you're John Piper or something, that there would be a time where you would need to disobey. The tricky part is, who decides when God's law is being broken? Who decides when it's okay to burden a conscience? Who decides what is essential and necessary for the church?
I mean, I think that part of the presupposition behind the question is usually off, because it presumes that government is sort of your dad, that God ordained government to be kind of your dad, and rather than punishing wickedness and rewarding goodness, it's there to basically tell you what to do. So the things that you need to think about with your dad are, I don't want to stack firewood with my dad right now, but it doesn't violate God's moral law for me to do so. So I guess I'll go stack firewood with my dad right now. And that presupposition and it gives us completely inadequate answers to these questions, because it's presumed that we're sort of children. And so government does need to tell us what to do. And then we're waiting for some really specific set of circumstances where, like, the governor of whatever state says, you may not teach justification by faith alone, Right. Okay. And then you're like, no, I'm a Lutheran. I shall teach justification by. You're waiting for a circumstance that will never realistically happen in the United States. Just legally, they're not going to say it that way. Right.
They're going to have some more clever way to silence a church.
Yeah, exactly.
And they found it.
Yeah.
They said shut down, and churches did. And most of them probably opened up relatively quickly. But you have some that have still lingered on not having service, for example. And they've agreed to stop preaching the gospel. They're going to say that, well, we're still preaching online. Okay, let's finesse that. They have agreed to stop meeting together as the scripture mandates and the scripture wants us to do. And I don't think there's any state right now that is stopping churches from meeting in person. Is there?
No, I don't think from meeting. I don't think
right from meeting. Yeah.
Right now.
And so, and we certainly know that in most states now churches are free to meet, which means that when a church decides they're capitulating to their own desires at this point, because they are now choosing. It's actually a worse place to find yourself. They are now choosing to put greater restrictions on themselves than even the government, under the guise of protecting a neighbor or something. There's always some nice thing put on there. But the debate we had, and this is where this question is probably born from, is early on in the COVID situation, churches were told to close. And the debate became, okay, Romans 13 or something like that says we have to obey the rulers, so we have to close. And then it just became the question of mask mandates and everything else. And people became really rather entrenched. So any way we answer this, people are going to be thinking COVID regulations. But there is going to be, if the church prohibited if the state prohibited the church from gathering, you of course would disobey that. The early church did disobey that. They met in catacombs, they met in homes. They first for fear of the Jews, then for fear of the Romans. Okay, so there are two authorities there. There are governing both religious and secular authorities telling you can't meet. And then you do. So I think, why couldn't we all agree on that?
Yeah.
But apparently we weren't able to.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, you kind of, when you were talking earlier about, this idea of viewing the government as father, of course, that made me think of the Large Catechism, where Luther actually explicitly connects government to fatherhood.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think has colored our perception of obedience? I mean, are we basically following Luther in this, or is this just our skewed view of what fatherhood is?
I think I think it's a skewed view of fatherhood, because I think it also presumes that we are sort of like 4-year-olds where, I don't really need to explain things to them or justify anything. And the problem is that constitutionally, I guess I mean that both the document, but then also sort of the way that our nation's history has structured governance on all levels, we are set up to behave as mature children. That is, even if the government is providing for me or helping me or caring for me by, say, not allowing child sacrifice to occur in the United States, which obviously dad's failing in that regard, even if they are providing and serving in a father-like office, that office functions in a way specific to our republic. And it's, I maintain that people that are just blindly obeying government mandates because they have been promulgated are helping to overturn our form of government, in the same way that when, Congress doesn't lets us go to war somewhere and doesn't bother to actually declare a war, they're helping to overturn our form of government as well.
Would you say it's fair to say that we are not obeying the scriptures when we don't behave as good citizens? And a good citizen in America would be to understand your government, understand your right, and understand your role as a free man in America. Yeah. So by being this kind of servile creature, you're actually not fulfilling what the scripture says. You're certainly not loving your neighbor. You're really not honoring your father and mother.
Right.
And you're really corrupting Romans 13, because in your role, you are allowing it to become this beast.
Right. Right. Yeah. And in any society, I mean, if the government said, and this is an example they bring up in the Magdeburg Confession, if the government tells you to prostitute your wife and daughters, do you have to obey because he's at a higher, he's higher in the food chain than you? No, you have actual responsibilities. And one of my responsibilities as a Christian American man is to make sure that the government doesn't do whatever it wants.
Yeah.
It's actually my calling,
Right. Your vocation as patriot is an interesting thing. Yeah. And it is a weird way to try to read Romans 13, the context of the Roman Empire, and then trying to one-to-one import that over into America, as if form of government doesn't matter, as if the civil law doesn't matter.
Well, and especially because Romans 13 presupposes a singular figure as an authority. I mean,
but that's what these people are going to. They're going, well, there's the governor. Yeah, but he's not meant to be a dictator.
No.
Right.
By design. I mean, same thing with the president. And really, same thing with, you could even say, the courts and other things like that. It's not really how this is designed.
Nobody wanted the courts to exist hardly at all. I mean, it's
So yeah, and we have to separate, I think, civil disobedience from 1960s style stuff too, because some of the things they were fighting for are not things I would say we should be contending for.
Yeah, and we're not funded by the CIA, so
right. Yeah. As far as they know, I mean, we don't ask for Gibbs. Okay, we don't ask for Gibbs, but that does not mean we have a secret backer. You know,
we're funded by Peter Thiel. They were funded by the CIA.
CIA, right? All right. Well, let's move on then, because I do want to get to some of these other ones. There is a question about critical theory and it being taught at Christian grade schools and colleges, and those who hold offices within the educational faculty, things like that. How can you contend against critical theory? I'm not trying to push this question off, but I do want to say, go listen to our critical theory episode. Yes. And one of the best things that you can do is to not support institutions that are teaching this.
Right.
And to be vocal about what is being taught and to document what's being taught. Let us see the syllabi, record the lectures and let people know. And especially in Christian institutions, just let it be known. Anything to add to that?
I would just say that critical theory is kind of a euphemism. I mean, it's simply anti-white. Right. And so it's anti the letter to the Galatians, right? You could think of critical race theory as simply Judaizing, in that if you are white, you need to become something else ethnically.
And the same thing with any middle qualifier you want to put in between critical and theory, right? It's anti-male. It's really any anti-Gender distinction. And at the end of the day, it's anti-Christ.
Yeah.
You have to say that. Anything that causes that much division. Now people will get mad at that and say, oh, you don't really understand it. Well, anything that demonizes the entire white race, as virtually irredeemable unless they allow themselves to be tortured is anti-scriptural.
Yeah.
So there you go. I don't even know why this is a debate, but here we are. Are arranged marriages something that Lutherans could reasonably consider for their children? Depends on how much cattle you have. Really?
Yeah, it sure does.
What kind of dowry we're getting here? Remember, dating culture is new and probably won't net you the best thing in the world, especially with all the apps and everything now. So, you guys with daughters want to comment?
Yeah, I think I
it depends. It's just like libertarianism. It only works in a high trust society.
That's okay.
That's good.
That makes me feel better, but not a lot better. Dating. Yes, dating. Sure, dating is literally gay in its origins. Thinking of human relationships. I'm just being honest. But courting was a thing. Like you knew who he was. This kind of thing. That's not so.
There's
bad.
a bundling board involved at times.
I don't support. I think that was always a bad idea. But I know it's trad. But there were some trad bad ideas.
There's some trad things that aren't always the best.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is where I'm getting squeamish with the tradness. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to go to another trad question that I don't think we should be squeamish about. Head coverings. It's a good topic of discussion. The biblical principle that women should cover their heads.
Yeah.
Who wants to tackle that one? Am I going to tackle that one?
I think Paul already did.
Paul did. Here's the thing, guys. I want to listen. Okay. This is how I'm going to answer this. Adam is already on record as being a Mennonite, so we know where he stands. But by virtue of being a Pennsylvanian German, Paul roots headship and head coverings in creation. He mentions to cover head because of the angels. Throughout this whole discussion on why women should keep their heads covered, he ends with basically saying, but if there be any dissensions, the churches of God, have no such custom. And he's not saying that we have no such customs about head coverings, because he's been talking about that for the last several verses. He's saying we have no custom of dissensions. That's the only right way to read that. He wouldn't go on and on about a big point and then go, but if you don't like it, well, we don't have any custom. So there is something more, going on there, in my opinion. It was the tradition well up into the 50s. Catholic Protestant churches, women at least wore a hat in church. And that is where head coverings, that kind of evolved into that. And so at the very least in the church services, the ancient Christian custom going all the way up into modern times has been to keep your head covered. And people don't like that, but that it's historically true. And so obviously much more discussion is needed on those actual verses, but that is sort of the Cliff's Notes version of the argument for head covering. And shoot us a message if you want any advice on where to buy them. So But it's something though. Don't like come into your house and see your wife and throw a bag over her head or something like that, or throw a doily on her head and bobby pin it in. Unless that's the way your households ran. I do think it's something that you need to be, especially in this day and age, sober-minded about and careful when you're discussing. But at the same time, there is a rich tradition and a biblical tradition of head covering that is hard to ignore if we're being fair.
I think
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, we're coming out of a period where people, would in many situations wouldn't want someone to come to church without a face covering. But
that's good.
Would go into orbit if you actually went after the covering that is prescribed in the Bible.
Yeah, hot take. I like it. Very well said. Very good. Okay, where are we at here? Okay, there's a couple, like I said, we won't be able to do. There's a good discussion on liturgical movement and legalism. We'll actually come back to that. We'll try to save that for another conclave or even its own episode. We talked a little bit about this in the Adiaphora episode and talked a lot about government in that episode as well. Here is, okay, I think we've got enough time to get through a couple more. So how do we, and so the question is worded like this. Some congregants don't like man-made rules, even if they're done in decency and order for the sake of pointing to Christ. So I'm going to try and reword this question a little bit, and listener, if I don't hit it right, you can let us know in WordFitly posting. But laudable customs that might not be demanded by the Bible, but have been handed down to us and are very good. How can we convince, or how can we show rather, our members that such customs are for their benefit?
I mean, it's very similar to what you just said about head coverings. That is, you realize something is right or something is better or something is good, but you also have to understand something we've talked about before, which is the distinction between tradition and history. And if you understand how untraditional a lot of very good, indubitably, historically Lutheran things are out there, and you want to introduce them, you have to go about it without harshness or absurdity in how you introduce them. And that's going to vary by what it is that you're trying to introduce and, the people affected, or who cares about this. Maybe nobody cares about this and you were told everyone would. But I think understanding that, you're not there to put every single duck in a row, but as you put more things in order, and bring, helpful ceremonies in, or whatever it is you're trying to introduce, that you understand and communicate that these are for the benefit of the people. And if it is aggressively weird, it might be wonderful to do. You're just never going to do it, or you're not going to do it for 10 years. And so I think the virtue here is not about knowledge of customs, which you can grow in, but about having patience as you introduce things. And that doesn't mean waiting 15 years to do something you should have done right away, but it just means understanding that patience is really the teacher's virtue. You have to be patient with people. And a pastor is scripturally also a teacher. So,
well, and especially recognizing the difference between those things which must be changed immediately, kind of a thing.
Right.
And those things which, as you say, are laudable and are good, but you can do without them, at least for a time being,
Yeah. And conceptually, a lot of people can't tell the difference between what is traditional for them and man-made. They have no capacity to distinguish between those things. So conceptually, I would actually start back with, okay, how does Jesus distinguish between doctrine versus commandments of men? And then they can begin to plug their own stuff, or you can over time, the stuff that they actually think is normal and obvious, also into commandments of men. So then they can begin to evaluate these things with less, let's say, emotional fervor.
Yeah, very good. Well, all right, guys, we're going to go just a little bit into overtime here because I do want to tackle this last question, and we can do it rather briefly. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the LCMS that no one is talking about today?
Including WordFitly or just in general?
Yes. That's the end.
Yeah, troubler of Israel that you are. The problem with it is everybody is talking about something everywhere. So it's hard to find one that no one is talking about. I think that, maybe one of the biggies is, even though we talk about family a lot, we talk about that just as sort of this ill-defined concept. We don't talk about the order within the family, what that actually means.
Yeah.
We talk about home catechesis, but we don't really talk about what that means as far as what it means to be a father teaching and what a biblically ordered household really looks like. And we don't demand that from anyone, from leaders to followers. And so there is a lot of conflict in families because of that. That might be one that we're not talking about. I mean, I suppose you could say supply chain issues or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think? Anything?
Demographically, we do talk about lack of kids, but the thing that I think about demographically, which would affect how our institutions function, how synod politics functions, how lots of things function, is the fact that boomers are the largest single, white demographic in the United States, and the LCMS is 95+% white. So as boomers not just retire from being pastors, but just are not alive anymore in the next, let's say, 20, 25 years, that drastically changes just how things work.
Yeah, and that's a big one. We talk about the coming clergy shortage. I don't think we're being realistic about that. I think that what we're seeing is guys who are not going to retire, who are either going to be living in a parsonage for their whole career, so they have no equity built up, so they can't, so they're going to keep going on. There are going to be guys who will retire, quote unquote, and then go on to serve for very low pay. Mm-hmm. So I think if there is a great shortage, it's actually much further off. It's going to be after the death of a certain generation, because many, many more of them will continue working. And then that will be kind of a stopgap. There won't be a need for younger clergymen to come in. And by that time, there might not be a need or a perceived need, let's be clear here, of the churches to actually pay full-time salary and benefits.
Right.
So I think we're not going to see that clergy shortage happen in the real short term. And then we might actually see a reorganization or a reevaluation of what people want in a pastor. And so that's something I don't think that we're really prepared for institutionally or, even at the local level. So anything else, guys? All right. Well, this has been A Word Fitly Spoken, the 150th episode extravaganza. See, we could have made it a clip show. We could have just had, hot sound bites from the last 150 episodes, but we did it all new and all fresh for you, the Word Fitly listener. So we thank you for listening. This has been A Word Fitly Spoken. If you like what you heard and want to know more, check us out, wordfitlyspoken.org, facebook.com/wordfitly, or Twitter @wordfitly. I'm Willie Grills, here with Zelwyn Heide, Aaron Uphoff, Adam Koontz, and previously with David Appold. God love you, and God bless.